A letter from Captain Gulliver to his cousin Sympsn, written in the year 1727. I hope you will be ready to own publicly, whenever you shall be called to it, that by your great and frequent urgency you prevailed on me to publish a very loose and uncorrect account of my travels, with directions to hire some young gentleman of either university to put them in order, and correct the style, as my cousin Dampier did, by my advice in his book, called A Voyage Round the World. But I do not remember I gave you the power to consent that anything should be admitted, and much less that anything should be inserted. Therefore, as to the latter, I do here renounce everything of that kind, particularly a paragraph about Her Majesty Queen Anne of most pious and glorious memory. Although I did reverence and esteem her more than any of the human species, but you, or your interpolator, ought to have considered that it was not my inclination, so it was not decent to praise any animal of our composition before my master hominin. And besides, the fact was altogether false, for to my knowledge, being in England during some parts of Her Majesty's reign, she did govern by a chief minister, nay, even by two successively, the first whereof was the Lord Godolphin, and the second was the Lord of Oxford, so that you have made me say the thing that was not. Likewise, in the account of the Academy of Projectors, and several passages of my discourse to my master hominin, you have either omitted some material circumstances, or minced and changed them, in such a manner that I do hardly know my own work. When I formerly hinted to you something of this in a letter, you were pleased to answer that you were afraid of giving offence, that people in power were very watchful over the press, and apt not only to interpret, but to punish everything which looked like an innuendo, as I think you call it. But pray, how could that which I spoke of so many years ago, and at about 5,000 leagues distance, in another reign, be applied to any of the Yahoos, who are now said to govern the herd, especially at a time when I little thought or feared the unhappiness of living under them? Have not I the most reason to complain when I see these very Yahoos carried by hominins in a vehicle, as if they were brutes, and those the rational creatures? And indeed, to avoid so monstrous and detestable a sight was one of the principal motives of my retirement hither. Thus much I thought proper to tell you in relation to yourself, and to the trust I repose in you. I do, in the next place, complain of my own great want of judgment, in being prevailed upon by the entreaties and false reasoning of you and some others, very much against my own opinion, to suffer my travels to be published. Pray bring to your mind how often I desired you to consider, when you insisted on the motives of the public good, that the Yahoos were a species of animal utterly incapable of amendment by precept or example. And so it is proved, for instead of seeing a full stop put to all abuses and corruptions, at least in this little island, as I had reason to expect, behold, after above 6 months' warning, I cannot learn that my book has produced one single effect according to my intentions. I desired you would let me know by letter when party and faction were extinguished, judges learned and upright, pleaders honest and modest, with some tincture of common sense, and Smithfields blazing with pyramids of law books, the young nobility's education entirely changed, the physicians banished, the female Yahoos abounding in virtue, honor, truth, and in good sense, courts and levees of great ministers throughout thoroughly weeded and swept, wit, merit, and learning rewarded, all disgracers of the press in prose and verse condemned to eat nothing but their own cotton, and quench their thirst with their own ink. These and 1,000 other reformations I firmly counted upon by your encouragement, as indeed they were plainly deducible from the precepts delivered in my book. And it must be owned that 7 months were a sufficient time to correct every vice and folly to which the Yahoos are subject, if their natures have been capable of the least disposition to virtue or wisdom. Yet so far you have been from answering my expectation in any of your letters, that on the contrary you are loading our carrier every week with libels, and keys, and reflections, and memoirs, and second parts, wherein I see myself accused of reflecting upon the great state folk, of degrading human nature. for so they still have the confidence to style it, and of abusing the female sex. I find likewise that the writers of those bundles are not agreed among themselves, for some of them will not allow me to be the author of my own travels, and others make me author of books to which I am wholly stranger. I find likewise that your printer has been so careless as to confound the times, and mistake the dates of my several voyages and returns, neither assigning the true year, nor the true month, nor the day of the month, and I hear the original manuscript is all destroyed since the publication of my book. Neither have I any copy left. However, I have sent you some corrections, which you may insert if ever there should be a second edition, and yet I cannot stand to them, but shall leave the matters to my judicious and candid readers to adjust it as they please. I hear some of our sea yahoos find fault with my sea language, as not proper in many parts, nor now in use. I cannot help it. In my first voyages, while I was young, I was instructed by the oldest mariners, and learned to speak as they did, but I have since found that the sea yahoos are apt, like the land ones, to become new-fangled in the words, which the latter change every year, insomuch as I remember upon each return to my own country their old dialect was so altered, and I could hardly understand the new. And I observed that when any Yahoo comes from London out of curiosity to visit me at my house, we neither of us are able to deliver our conceptions in a manner intelligible to the other. If the censure of the Yahoos could any way affect me, I would have a great reason to complain, that some of them are so bold as to think my book of travels a mere fiction out of mine own brain, and have gone so far as to drop hints that the hominins and Yahoos have no more existence than the inhabitants of Utopia. Indeed, I must confess that as to the people of Lilliput, Brobdingnag, for so the word should have been spelt, and not erroneous Brobdingnag, and Laputa, I have never yet heard any Yahoo so presumptuous to dispute their being, or the facts I have related concerned them, because the truth immediately strikes every reader with conviction. And is there less probability in my account of the hominins or Yahoos, when it is manifest as to the latter there are so many thousands even in this country, who only differ from their brother brutes in Hominland because they use a sort of jabber and do not go naked? I wrote for their amendment, and not for their approbation. The united praise of the whole race would be of less consequence to me than the neighing of those 2 degenerate hominins I keep in my stable, because from these, degenerate as they are, I still improve in some virtues without any mixture of vice. Do these miserable animals presume to think that I am so degenerate as to defend my veracity? Yahoo as I am, it is well known throughout all Hominland that by the instructions and examples of my illustrious master, I was able, in the compass of 2 years, although I confess with the utmost difficulty, to remove that infernal habit of lying, shuffling, deceiving, and equivocating, so deeply rooted in the very souls of all my species, especially the Europeans. I have other complaints to make upon this vexatious occasion, but I forbear troubling myself or you any further. I must freely confess that since my last return, some corruptions of my Yahoo nature have revived in me by conversing with a few of your species, and particularly those of my own family, by an unavoidable necessity, else I should never have attempted so absurd a project as that as reforming the Yahoo race in which this kingdom, but I have now done with all such visionary schemes forever. April 2nd, 1727.